And good morning. You're listening to Inside Out on tbs eFM. I'm your host, Walter Foreman. My guest today, I'm very, very happy to introduce, and he comes in a long line of big-name guests here on tbs eFM's Inside Out. We're talking to none other than Tyler Rasch. Good morning,
Hello,
sir.
Good morning.
Well, it is great to have you here. And as I said, you do join a long list of relatively big-name guests that we've had here on the program. We've been really lucky in our tenure to have big names on the show. Mayor Pagwan Soon has been a guest on the program. Michael Bolton from, of course, the U.S. has been a guest on the program, as has George Takei, also from the U.S.
Yes.
So you're in good company, sir.
Oh, it's an honor. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, truly, the honor is ours, and we thank you for your time. Lots to talk about. I think I'd like to get this right out of the way, right away, right off the bat. How is it that your Korean is so good?
I don't really know how to answer that question. Personally, I every day I feel the limits of my linguistic abilities.
Okay.
So I think really the way that I got here was just sort of being obsessed with learning more Korean or always feeling that that limit and always pushing against that. And it's been over 7 years now, I guess. Going on 8 years of learning Korean. And I studied in the university at the University of Chicago. I took official classes there. So I had a teacher who helped me, and studying abroad in South Korea really, really helps to learn more Korean. But I think above and beyond everything, it's sort of very important, specifically for native English speakers, to avoid English while you're learning Korean. And it's a very difficult thing to do, particularly even in Korea, actually. So that's been a very important part of learning.
It's a good tip, and it's a good point, and you're right. It is getting harder and harder to do as there are more and more native English-speaking non-Koreans here in Korea. You know, if you look back to when I came, we were talking about this before we went on air. I came in '98. I think there were 300,000 non-Koreans in the whole country. Yeah. And, you know, and how many of those were native English speakers? Probably less than half.
Right.
So let's say 150,000. I mean, now there's over 1.6 million non-Koreans in the country, and native English speakers amongst those, I don't know, I'd hate to guess, but probably 5, 6, 7, 800,000.
Right,
so it's getting harder and harder to do. So your advice is good advice indeed. And, you know, I remember not that long ago, the U.S. Foreign Service Institute, which is part of the Department of State, they actually called Korean one of the 4 hardest languages for English speakers to learn. The other 3 being Arabic, Chinese, and Japanese.
Yes.
And do you speak any of those other languages?
I don't. I think it would be an error to say that I speak them.
Okay.
I think that in the process of learning Korean, I did take a small Japanese class for about 10 weeks in the University of Chicago. But in the process of learning Korean and studying in the university, Seoul National University here, in order to study the history of Korean diplomacy, you have to sort of learn Hanja. You have to learn like Chinese characters in order to use these sort of old documents. So that's been very helpful to read documents in Chinese or Japanese for research purposes. So that's I'm able to do that, but I can't speak.
Okay, fair enough. Well, I guess my point is
but,
being that at least you have one of those, the Korean, clearly well in hand. And I understand you do actually, though, speak a couple of other languages.
I guess,
Portuguese?
So the way this works is I originally first learned French from when I was young, growing up in Vermont next to Quebec. We share a border with Quebec, and there's lots of exchange. So we learn more French than we do Spanish in Vermont.
Makes sense.
Learned a lot of French, and then when I went to college, I learned some Spanish and some Portuguese because my mom's from south of Boston in Fall River area where there's lots of Portuguese speakers. And so I tried to learn some Portuguese, and my dad's originally from Austria, so I tried to learn some German.
Oh, wow.
I was totally going back and forth and not knowing what I was doing with my life. But so in that process, I learned a lot.
That's a good thing, quite obviously, because not only did it help you learn a lot of languages, it got you to where you are today.
Yes, it did.
You mentioned, in response to my question about how your Korean got so good, you mentioned feeling the limits of your language every day. And I think that's a common occurrence for a lot of people, regardless of the level of their language. And even sometimes not just language itself, but just living in a foreign culture. A lot of non-Koreans in Korea say that the language barrier, however, is their sort of biggest hurdle to sort of leading a regular life. You've obviously overcome that hurdle of the language barrier. So then how is your life in Korea as a non-Korean? Is it pretty easygoing, or do you still find those other sort of cultural limits?
I think that the best way to explain this would be that learn language barriers. As soon as they disappear, you run into other sort of more important and more fundamental barriers, whether those be overt sort of cultural, extreme cultural differences that are really based on worldviews or philosophy or things like that, or social differences, different social structures that you're not used to because you come from a different country with a different social structure, different social makeup. Yeah. So you run into those barriers, and it's definitely a lot more intense than the linguistic barriers that you experience in sort of the more beginning periods. And I think that sort of maybe one of the reasons why those are actually they're very strong barriers here. Actually, like a lot of people think that Korea and the United States are very, very close, and so those cultural differences would be very bridgeable or not felt after you learn the language to a certain degree. But that's not true. They're very deep, and so you definitely do feel that on an everyday basis. The way that you think or you view the world or you interact with other people on a cultural or social level, and I think that it can be hard at times. You know. And I don't really know how to say it, but I think that it's probably it's not really on an individual basis. It's more on a societal level, I think, and that probably comes from, in a way, there's not a lot of foreign people who speak Korean in general, and so even if you have a lot of foreigners that are living in Korea, yes, there's a lot of cross-cultural exchange and there's a lot of learning about each other that happens, but that tends to happen in English. Yeah. And so the context within which that sharing occurs then influences the way that things are accepted or not. And so having that sharing occurring in Korean is a completely different context and has completely different results in terms of social acceptance or how you function in society. Yeah. And so that type of sharing in Korean has not occurred on a large level. Exactly right. It's been occurring for a very long time. If you look at Korean history, since the end of, they call it 대한제국 period, right? And the end of the 19th century, there's been since then, there's been constant communication in Korean between Koreans and non-Koreans. However, it's always been on a very small scale. So you always do run into these very big, deep differences. And it's not necessarily easy.
Yeah, right. You know, in the introduction, I mentioned that you're renowned for many things. Of course, your remarkable Korean language proficiency, but also your sort of linguistic eloquence. And I think that was proof of that. That was a very insightful and thoughtful answer early on a Saturday morning here. We certainly do appreciate. No, not at all. It was a compliment.
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
But, you know, you're exactly right. And I guess if I were to sum it up, I'd say that, you know, there is maybe some truth in that saying that ignorance is bliss. So when you come into a foreign culture and you don't know the language, although you should always be encouraged to learn the language and the culture, there's that honeymoon period where ignorance is bliss. So you don't know what's going on and you're just enjoying it. And the deeper you go, the more there is to do. And that's what you said about learning, hitting your limits and feeling them. Absolutely. Maybe taking half a step back and just sort of asking, how did it all get started? I mean, your interest in Korean and Korea. You mentioned your father's Austrian. There's a lot of Portuguese and French spoken where he came from. But where did the interest in Korea come from?
I think it was a process of it was the result of a process of trying to find something completely new and different. And I mean, I've always been interested in learning about culture or society, other people's ways of thinking through language, and I've done that since I was young. Right. And that's evident through, you know, just my history, I guess. But stumbling upon Korean was essentially, I had to really try to get out of this very Western-centered. I hate using that expression. Western-centered view of the world.
You're from the West. You can say that.
but it's true in a way. If you learn languages that originate in Europe, you tend to have access then to information that are stored in those languages, and that information therefore is based on the history of those languages and those places. And so you always get access to European culture or European views of the history of the world, or politics or philosophy, etc., etc. And those do overlap. Even if you're learning German or you're learning French, they will overlap at some point. And you'll start to feel similar things, and that's just because they're in similar cultural spheres.
Yeah.
But if you do this over and over again with French and German and Spanish and Portuguese and Italian, or if you keep going in that direction, then you don't really get that much of a new perspective.
You get a lot of
to be
overlapping.
honest, you get a lot of overlapping. And so I had a friend in college who had a very similar cultural background as I. Her mother is from Europe. She's German, and her father is American. My mother's American. My father's originally from Austria. So we both had this different upbringing than a lot of other Americans around us. And so trying to think about this European perspective, this American perspective, but we were sort of caught in this Atlantic perspective, so to speak. But so she was studying Chinese at the time and was like, you just need to study something completely different.
Yeah.
Why don't you study Chinese, or why don't you study something like Arabic? Just get out of your cultural sphere, try something new. And so I was like, okay, but that was after my first year of college, and it was summer, and you can't really study Chinese by yourself very easily. But I was like, hey, let's go to a bookstore, see what we can find to study on my own. So I go there and I'm looking through all the language books. And to be honest, bookstores in the United States don't have that great of a selection when it comes to foreign language materials. So a lot of it was just written in Latin letters, and nothing was very explanatory. So the only book that really gave you a full taste of what the language was like was a Teach Yourself book. It's a British series, Teach Yourself, on Korean. And so it had Hangul in it, and I was able to just take that for the summer and just sort of play around with Hangul and learn the basic stuff. And at that time, YouTube was getting really big. It was 2007. So this is right before the 2008 election, and so everybody's talking about YouTube and looking on YouTube for like election stuff, and everybody's starting to search on YouTube for things. And so I tried searching on YouTube in Korean, and then all of a sudden you get all of this information that I had never heard of before, like documentaries on the North Korean human rights crisis and the Great Famine of the 1990s, and like stuff that I didn't even know existed, and that was just new perspective. Things that I would never have gotten if I didn't try searching in Korean. And all of a sudden I was like, this is what I was looking for, the things that I wouldn't have had access to. And so in the beginning, that's where I got interested. And it started with that new perspective. And I think I kept going with it for the same reason. I had switched from, Spanish to Portuguese to German every semester. But the reason why I didn't switch away from Korean is because no matter how much deeper you get in the learning process, there's still more perspective to be gained. And so that's really what has gotten me stuck in it.
It's impressive on a lot of levels. And was this all going on in Vermont still?
This was in Chicago.
That's in Chicago.
So I grew up in Vermont, but I moved to Chicago for college, and that's where I sort of had more selection when it came to that kind of thing.
Interesting. And I think, if memory serves, there's actually quite a good language school in Vermont, the School of International Training?
School of International Training does international. They send you abroad to do a lot of stuff. It's a very, very good school. It's an exchange school. But the school that I think you're probably thinking of is Middlebury College.
Maybe.
They do really intense immersion language education.
Vermont.
Based in Vermont.
It's interesting that when I think of Vermont, I do think of the sort of quiet, quaint, communities, falling leaves, changing colors. But it turns out that it's a hotbed of international relations.
It is. It
and
really
languages
is.
and
Vermonters
cultures.
are very much interested in when I was in school there, the chorus classes would be, traditional Bulgarian music. I mean,
there you go. Exactly my point.
Very different. So.
Exactly my point. Well, it's fascinating to hear how you got your how it really is, and as you said, and it is true, stumbled onto Korean. But it seems to be quite literally, it was a window to a new world for you, and a world which has served you well. So congratulations on that.
Thank you.
If I could, I'd like to turn the conversation now a little bit to the Abnormal Summit, or the 비정상회담. That's really been a hit show, and we'll talk about maybe why that is in a moment. But it's sort of really where you got thrust into the public eye. So then the question, of course, has to be, how did you get to appear on that program?
It was actually an accident.
That's how I got here as well.
It was a pure accident. So I'm a student originally. I had no desire whatsoever to be on TV or in media or anything. But I'm a student originally. I'm doing my MA, and there's just sometimes when you don't have any money and you're sitting there with flour and water and sugar, and you mix it together and you fry it in the frying pan, and that's what you eat for a week.
That's an exaggeration, no? Or is that true?
For about 3 days, but it's
Really?
true. Yeah,
Wow.
it's true. Because I was trying very hard to avoid the English speaking community, so I
Yeah.
never taught English
Right,
actually.
sure.
I was having a difficult time financially, and there's a website that a lot of international students in Korea use to find short-term sort of part-time jobs.
Okay.
And so I went on that website and I saw that there was just a broadcasting company that was looking for foreign students.
Yep.
And it's very common that you will have broadcasting companies that look for foreign students or advertisements that look for foreign students to take a photo of you eating kimchi or have you try kimchi in a
Yes,
commercial.
yes,
And
yes.
they give you, 80,000 won,
Yep.
and then you walk away and you can eat for a week. So, so I was like, okay, this will be great. So
Yeah.
I sent them my resume, and then there was no definition in terms of what that show was going to be like. They were
Okay.
just saying, we are looking for foreign students.
Yeah.
That was the end.
Wow.
So I sent them my resume, and then they contacted me. They were like, okay, so you speak Korean. Why don't you come in for an interview? So I was like, okay. I go in for the interview. And I was expecting, maybe like 3 interviewers
Yeah.
tops, but
Yeah.
there were 12 of them.
Wow.
Like 12
That's a
women
panel.
sitting on the,
Yeah.
total panel sitting on the other side of the table, and just me. And they just ask you about everything, anything and everything.
Wow.
And I didn't really know what I was getting into. And then they were like, oh, okay, we'll contact you soon. And then they were like, oh, we'd like you to be on the show. And I was like, okay, that sounds great. But I didn't know it was going to be a long-term thing.
Right.
They had told me it's going to happen more than once. And I was like, okay. But I'm used to sort of the American way of doing TV, which is in a series
Yeah.
format.
Yeah.
And so I was thinking, okay, maybe we'll shoot something for the summer and then be done by fall.
Right.
And I was like, oh, my sister's getting married in the fall. I have to go back home. And they were like, you can't leave. I was like, what? I was like, what? So they're like, no, we were going to start this and we're not going to end until the train crashes.
Till it ends, yeah,
I was
right.
like, okay. So, it just got sucked up into this giant,
Right.
massive thing that I didn't know what I was getting into, and that became the Abnormal Summit that
Sure.
became this TV show. So-
Yeah, wow. Well, it's interesting, again, like you stumbled onto Korean itself, the language, and thereby the culture, and that window to the new world.
Right.
You sort of, I guess, stumbled onto this.
Yeah, definitely.
Necessity being the mother of invention, and so you were looking for some work. But did it, too, then serve as sort of a window to a new world? I mean, being on
Oh,
television and being in the public eye? Tell us about that.
Oh, I would hate, I don't mean to insult my university or any professors that I've ever had, but this experience has been the most educational experience that I've had in
Right,
Korea.
right.
Being involved in media really exposes you to group psychology, like how Korean society works in a way that you would never see it anywhere else.
Right, right.
The way that people respond to television in general is very different here than they do back home. And the way that companies work here, particularly media companies function, or media groups, how they interact with each other, is very, very different than you would expect. It's very, very competitive. It's very, very cutthroat between the broadcasting systems. I don't feel that so much as an individual,
Right.
Who's on TV.
Yeah, you're
However,
the talent.
As the talent, you don't feel that pressure as
Right.
much, but you see it everywhere you go.
Yeah, the producers would be feeling it and everyone
Exactly.
else, yeah.
So having access to that has really been an eye opener.
Right.
Super eye opener, and I've learned so much. I don't even know where to begin with.
And presumably it's been positive for the most part, I'm sure.
Yes,
so going
definitely.
back then, if you had to, you'd respond again to that ad?
Oh yeah.
if they said exactly what it was
Yeah,
for?
I would totally, I would not miss that opportunity
Right.
at all.
Well, it's good to know. We're coming up on a short break in a couple of minutes, so probably time for one quick question here before that break. The show is it's really, there's a lot of nations represented
Yes.
there. It's a big panel, but I believe you're the only United States citizen.
Yes, correct.
So does that bring to you then an extra level of burden, especially knowing the closeness of the relationship
Yes.
between the two countries that
Yes.
you alluded to?
It's a huge burden, in particular because a lot of people think that they know the United States very well. However, the United States as a federal system,
Yes.
and having every state having their own constitution
Right.
and separate legal systems,
Right.
becomes very, very hard to represent accurately.
Yes, yes.
And there are some very fundamental differences that a lot of Korean people cannot understand because they haven't grown up in a system like that.
Sure.
And so it becomes really difficult to explain yourself, and also things that it becomes very difficult to generalize about the United States, because I can't talk about Vermont as if that's representative of the United States, because
Fair,
it's
yeah,
not.
right.
And I can't talk about California as if it's representative of the United States, because it's not.
Sure.
So I have to in some way explain the diversity of the United States with everything that I say, and there's a huge burden with that, but I enjoy it very much.
Yeah. Well, and it's good. If you enjoy it, then, you look forward to it, and it's not going to weigh you down, and it's not going to turn sort of things to a more negative direction.
Yes.
I'm from Canada, as we talked about earlier before we went on air, and of course, similar issues there, I think, but it's more pronounced in the U.S. given the population of the U.S., some 300 and plus million compared to Canada's 30 plus million. But the one thing I usually use to help Koreans really get a grasp for it, it's not the physical size difference. I say Canada has 6 time zones.
It's a good way of speaking.
So when someone on the East Coast wakes up and it's 8 a.m., it's already, I don't know what time on the West Coast.
Yeah,
I mean, that very often, I think, puts it into some perspective. Of course, you can say that the landmass is X 100 times bigger or whatever it is, but for me, it's the time zones.
Really, I think it's the time zones is great.
Yeah, it's a good way to wrap it up. And speaking of wrapping up, we're going to wrap up the first part of our conversation this morning, but we will be back with more in our conversation with Tyler Rasch after this. And we're back on Inside Out on TBS eFM. I'm your host, Walter Foreman. Our guest this morning, well, it's Tyler Rasch from the Abnormal Summit, and we're very, very happy to have him. Welcome back to part 2 of the program, sir.
Thank you.
And speaking of that Abnormal Summit, that's where we left off at the start of the break, and I'd like to just keep it there for a while. It's safe to say that the show is a hit.
Yes, it is.
In your opinion, what's sort of the reason behind that? What's the reason for the success?
I think number one, I think, is a lot of the content that comes out of the show is very honest.
Okay.
And I think that the attitude that many of the people who are on the show have is very, very conscient of. They're very conscious of what they say and how that has an effect in Korea culturally and in the society in general on how non-Koreans are viewed.
Yeah.
And so I think that has resulted in a very, very honest conversation on TV with the Korean populace. And I think that that's very interesting for Korean people as well as for non-Korean communities. So that's why I think it's really taken off among Korean viewership, as well as if you look online, I mean, it's really constantly in the top download lists in top 10 for China, Taiwan. It's very, very, very popular abroad as well. So
and that's a very interesting point that you bring to the table. Of course, I look at it and how it affects my life here in Korea, but it does have even wider repercussions than that, doesn't it? Because the panelists are made up from so many different countries. Undoubtedly, people from those countries are also watching.
Right.
So, what goes on in that program and the things that are said certainly can reach a lot of eyes and a lot of ears. Yeah, indeed. And we talked about the burden that you may feel, or indeed that you did say you do feel, being the only U.S. citizen on the program then. Are you also cognizant of that sort of bigger burden of just representing, quote unquote, non-Koreans and then also having to represent Korea?
yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I'm always... Every time I'm talking on the TV show, I always know that there is going to be there are going to be a lot of people who are viewing that content and immediately thinking about the social or cultural repercussions of that immediately, just because there's no way of escaping that innuendo that's occurring there. I mean, the types of things that we talk on the program, sometimes they're very soft. Sometimes we talk about very, very simple topics, but in reality, that's sort of just the frame in order to talk about some deeper issues that are difficult to talk about in Korean society and in Korean media in general. And I think that both the people who make the program and participate in the program are very conscious of that. I think the viewers are very conscious of that. And I think everybody really is just wanting to have more and more of that content.
Sure.
And that's really what gets them.
So what are you given before a taping? Like presumably you're given a theme for the program, but then are you given specific talking points, or like how does it sort of work that the messages get out there?
So what I love about this program is that it is honest in the development of what people would call a script, right? So in most programs, you will have the writers who write the script and provide the script to the people who are on the program, and they would give their talking points, blah, blah, blah.
Like today, for example.
like today, for example, right. So, but in our program, the way that it works is that they choose a topic. They choose a topic, and a very general topic. Like, for instance, the first show was about becoming economically independent, right? So economic independence, becoming independent from the family. This was the topic. And every single question that could ever be related to that topic and every subtopic is then formulated in a questionnaire that the writers will then use in an interview with each individual who's on the TV show. And they interview each person for at least an hour and a half. Sometimes the interview can go up to 3 hours, depending on the topic, really, and how much you have to say about that. And then that content is then they record everything and they type it out, and then they figure out, okay, we want this question, the answers to this question to be on the TV show. So then they create sort of the flow of the TV show, right?
Interesting process.
Topic one, subtopic one, subtopic two, and they'll be like, when this topic comes out, just make sure that you told us what you told us in this question. And they will rewrite it for you and provide it for you in a script, exactly word for word what you said. And so then when you get it back, it's like, oh, okay, this is what I said. These are my words. There are times when they do find extra content that wasn't discussed. For example, if something came out in the news between the interview, or if there's something that's being discussed on Korean blogs, or very, very somehow in the Korean populace is being discussed but hasn't been talked about in the interview, they will bring that in and be like, can you talk about this? What can you say to us about this? And they'll just have you give your honest opinion about that. So it's very straightforward, and I love that that's honesty coming out of the program instead of something that's
just
a little
scripted
bit more
from the get-go and from that sort of perspective. You know, we talked about perspective earlier, and we talked about discovering worlds, and so it's nice to hear the direction that's coming from. Yeah, impressive, and a lot of work.
It's a
lot of work for that production team.
It's very much a lot of work. They're very they work so hard.
You know,
they don't sleep.
You reap what you sow. So
this is true.
There you go. It's worth it in the end because the product is a good one. It's been a big hit for sure. Last question about the Abnormal Summit before we move on to something else. Can you share with us a behind-the-scenes story? Something nobody knows yet. A scoop, an exclusive.
A scoop or an exclusive about non-summit. Oh, well, I can't give away all the secrets, but oh dear. So how do I allude to that? So this this program is very international in terms of the content that we're producing as non-Koreans who are on TV. And this program is being viewed not only by Koreans but people abroad as well. And so as the program has grown, I think there are probably going to be more opportunities to communicate internationally, even with people in other countries. So the program is in a process of growing. I don't really know how to give a behind-the-scenes story about this kind of thing, but
and just in case any of the listeners are wondering, no, he is not very subtly suggesting that I'm going to be on the program. He's not suggesting that in any way, shape, or form, because that wouldn't happen. I do speak a little Korean, but I try not to on air because my Korean is conversational at best, and apparently now my English has left me as too. So, all right, so we'll leave it at that. It's going to be potential for reaching more of an international audience. So keep your eyes peeled for that. Now, in the introduction, I said you are a TV personality, and that is true, and you're renowned for being on the Abnormal Summit. But you are known for many other things as well, and one of them is a magazine or a webzine perhaps called Soulism. And that's about, actually, to be honest, that's when I first came across the name Tyler Rasch.
Oh, really?
It was with Soulism.
Okay.
And so I'd like to know, I'd like you rather to share with the listeners, what is this Soulism project?
Soulism was a project that I started in 2013. And it ran from 2013 to 2014, and currently it's sort of just been left there because there wasn't really a structural organization to continue that project. But it's essentially international students writing their thoughts in Korean and then putting that online in a webzine format and sort of trying to distribute it to Korean netizens. So essentially, it's sort of a written version of Abnormal Summit before Abnormal Summit happened, if you think.
Sure.
We had, various students from many different countries, from China, Pakistan, Myanmar, the United States, Britain. It was very, very diverse, and so it was really great to work with other students who are studying in the Seoul area, and just do everything in Korean. We would meet up on the weekends and edit each other's writing in Korean. Everything was done in Korean, and so it was a learning process for us to learn through our writing as we do it.
Right.
And it was also it just gives you a great feeling to when you see people leave comments on your writing in Korean about like what Koreans think about what you've written or what you think, and so it was just a really great experience.
So it was about international students who are coming from wherever, the United States, China, Pakistan, as you said, here in Korea, and sharing their experiences.
Right. So, there's a lot of international students in South Korea now.
Exactly what I was going to get to.
Yeah.
The government has quite a large push. They have a program called 2020.
Yes,
they want to get 200,000, which would be 20만 원, 20.
Yes.
International students here by the year 2020.
Right.
I think they're currently, last time I checked, they're around 80 or 90,000.
Yes,
so they got to slightly more than double it in the next 4 or 5 years.
True.
I think they're going to make it. I really do.
I think they will come very close to their target. If they don't make it, I think that the target, it'll have the effect that they want, even if they don't reach 200,000.
You're exactly right. And you are involved with a number of different sort of sides of the international student experience. Of course, we talked about Soulism, the webzine that you started, but you're also the head of the American International Student Association?
I'm the vice president.
Pardon me.
The president is named Alexanne Pitts, and she's from Arkansas. She's in the same school as I am. She's in in Korean, it's 행정대학원. I always forget the public administration school. Yeah.
Very good. So tell us about your role in that organization as well as the organization itself.
Okay. So I co-founded that with Alexanne a while back, and essentially the idea is that American students actually we make up about the fourth largest student group in South Korea according to nationality. The first is obviously Chinese students.
Right.
There are also a lot of Mongolian students here, but we happen to be the fourth largest group. And a lot of other student groups, they have these nationalities of students. They have their own groups that are active in providing them with opportunities and introducing them to jobs or internships or cultural programs, et cetera, and unfortunately, American students have not had access to that in the past. We've been here in huge numbers, particularly since 1980s, and so we didn't really understand why we didn't have an organization or why there weren't people trying to get us better opportunities, and so Alexanne and I just decided to figure out how to do that on our own. So we got a bunch of students together and we started bringing them to companies that are active in particularly the Seoul area. So we visited Naver, which is a Korean IT company, and we visited Mitsui, which is a large trading company it's a Japanese company, but they have an office here in Seoul. And we also visited Kotra. We visited a bunch of different places, and so we're actually planning to be visiting some more companies this coming semester.
Okay, great. So it's an association that allows the American students who are here studying in Korea to get internships and connections with businesses.
Essentially, the idea is to improve opportunities for academic and professional development for students, because that's not really provided by universities.
You're exactly right, and that's to me that's going to be a huge part of the equation of the 2020 plan.
It is.
Sure, you get the 200,000 here, but what are you going to do with them?
Exactly. Yes.
Once you got them here, it's easy. What you do with them, put them in class. Fair enough.
Right.
But when they're done,
how do you connect them to industry? How do you connect them to
really maximize
national
that
development?
Yeah.
Right.
And are you involved in the study of that area sort of for your thesis?
Yes, I am.
I thought so. Tell us about that.
Actually, so my master's thesis is a comparative study of Korea and Malaysia and how they use international student policy to sort of create more network influence in the international sphere. So for example, the United States has a Fulbright program and it's very popular, and a lot of people who have come out of that program have become heads of state, very influential people, and that has been great for the United States in terms of having somebody who understands you and who's making decisions but won't make decisions that are really against your national interests. And so these programs programs have been sort of modeled in other countries. But now that you have countries like Korea and Malaysia, they're not these superpowers. They're not like China and Russia and these countries. But however, they're making these efforts, and it's really interesting to see how they do that. And so I'm trying to make a comparison in how these nations are trying to build that new power through people.
Yeah, it's a fascinating topic, a very timely topic, a very necessary topic as well. So you're really well focused there, I think, and that paper is one I would probably look forward to reading.
Thank you.
Please send me a tweet when that's done so I can read it.
I will.
All right,
sure.
Very good. How long is that going to be till it's done, do you think?
Well, actually, there's a small version of it, a small portion of it that's only based on the Korean policy, but that will be coming out in my professor's book at some point in June.
All right,
so
I'll look forward to it. Turn me on to that, and then I'll look forward to I'll have the appetizer and then the full meal once yours is done.
Great.
I'd like to stick with the international education thing just for another minute or two here, if I could. I think, the United States has long been one of the top, if not the top, destinations of study for Korean students. Right. You, as an American who came here to study, could you talk about that experience? What does Korea offer to international students in general and of course, American students specifically when they come here to study?
I think that again, not to talk too much about policy, but I think that Korea is still trying to figure out what it has to offer. I don't think they really understand all of the benefits that they can offer international students from their experiences here, because that's also, again, different based on which country you've come from.
That's very true.
So Chinese students will have a very different sense of what they need and what they're gaining in terms of their experience here than American students.
Yes.
I think for people who are coming from particularly the English-speaking world, Anglophone students who come to this country to study abroad, if they choose to engage themselves in Korean language curriculum, then they will gain much more than they would if they did otherwise, and they will gain much more than they would from studying in Europe or anywhere else, really, because that it's just an incredibly different perspective on so many levels, and it just really it opens your mind in so many ways, and. Oh, geez. There's so much to talk about there. I don't really know. It's like the tip of the iceberg.
I don't expect you to condense your thesis into the 10 minutes or so that we have left. But I get I get what you're saying. It is first and foremost going to be different experiences for different people from different countries, of course. Yes.
I think that as an international relations person, I think it really helps to give a new perspective on Asia in a way that is not heavily influenced by pro-American or pro-Chinese or this sort of like hegemonic struggle discourse. You can see the hegemonic struggle discourse very clearly by engaging the Korean language and Korean society. However, being here doesn't force you to view the world from a Chinese perspective or an American perspective. It gives you something that's very I think it would be very similar to if you want to go to study in an English-speaking country, but you choose to go to Canada instead of going to the United States. It gives you a very different feel politically about how the world works. And I think that's very similar to coming to Korea as opposed to going to China or Japan. It gives you a very different, very much more open perspective on Asia.
It does. And I think, the Koreans have the famous saying, the shrimp between two whales. And even Canada has its own sort of version of that. One of our famous prime ministers, I think it was Pierre Elliott Trudeau, said of the United States, when you sleep next to the elephant, you feel every little motion he makes in his sleep.
That totally makes so much sense to me.
Well, I'd like to turn the conversation back sort of to you and some of the interesting things you've done. We've touched on a few of them, of course, your time more recently on the Abnormal Summit, the work you've done with Soulism and international students, the serving as the vice president of the American International Student Association. But something else that you did that I found very interesting, you worked for the Korean Embassy in Washington, D.C.
I did.
Tell us about that experience. I mean, what did you do there? How did you get that opportunity? And, of course, what was it like?
Well, most embassies in general, no matter where they are, tend to have local hires. And particularly in Washington, because although it's the capital of the United States, it's a very international political city in terms of foreign policy and other countries trying to voice themselves in terms of what's going on in economic and military policy globally. So they tend to many countries will try to hire Americans to help them with political, military, or just clerical work in the embassy in order for them to be able to better influence the U.S. government.
Yeah.
And so the Korean government at the time was trying very hard to push the Korea-US FTA through Congress.
Yeah.
And although a lot of Koreans seem to have the impression that most of the anti-FTA movement was here,
Right.
They have that impression very strongly, I think. But if they were in the United States at the time or in Washington, they would have realized that it would not have passed if it weren't for very, very strong lobbying efforts on behalf of the Korean government.
Interesting.
So many Congress members were very much against. Americans can be very, very protectionist when it comes to trade. So that was the big hot topic on the table when I was there.
Yeah.
And so they basically hired me to be an assistant to the ambassador there at the time. His name is Han Deok-soo. He's currently the 한국무역협회 회장.
Yep.
And I would essentially help him with his scheduling and communications with anybody who's not Korean. So a lot of the communications that occur diplomatically in Washington, you would assume that they would be between the foreign nation and the United States. However, that's not necessarily true.
Sure.
It's a lot of communication occurs between the Korean embassy and the Chinese embassy and the Korean embassy and the Japanese embassy.
Right.
It's very, very multinational. And so all of the non-Korean based communications for the ambassador that were not directly handled by himself would be my work.
Wow.
So that's what I was arranging for him, and just being there when you see everything happen. Like the shelling of the Yeonpyeong-do Islands occurred when I was there, and I got to see how the U.S. government and how the Korean government responded to that on a moment-to-moment basis.
Wow.
It's very, very, very interesting.
You know, and when I asked you how it was that you got the position on the Abnormal Summit, you said, well, you just sort of answered an ad on a website.
Yes.
How was it then that you got the position to work with the embassy
I did
in
a
Washington?
lot of searching for Korea-related jobs when I was in Washington. So I did so much internet searching. I was originally working as an intern for Senator Leahy, who's a Democrat from Vermont.
Okay.
And I was working in the Judiciary Committee there. So, but then I wanted to do something that was related to Korea, so I was constantly searching, and eventually I found that they were looking for research assistants, economic assistants, and stuff at the Korean embassy, and I just sort of sent in an application to see how it went, and they asked me for an interview, so I went to the interview, and I thought it was okay, and it turned out that it was good, and they wanted to pick me, so
and at this time, your Korean language skills were already quite advanced?
They were not where they are now at all.
Safe to say.
I was about in the Korean language education system. I was about a level 4.
Okay.
So that's actually upper intermediate. So it wasn't that advanced. But I learned a lot.
Sure, I can imagine. Yeah, good for you. I mean, all the better for it today, because again, look where it's gone you. Fantastic indeed. Well, we have just a couple of minutes left here this morning before we start to wrap things up, and so therefore I'd like to sort of wrap things up about what we've been talking about today. You've been in Korea now for a while. You've achieved a lot. Do you see yourself staying here long term, and what are your plans sort of for the future?
I do my best not to plan too much, because I've learned, as you've heard from everything that I've said, that things happen to be stumbled upon in life. And so, yes, I like to have a general direction, but I don't have any solid plans at all.
I hope my wife is listening, because I often make that same sort of statement.
It's just too difficult for them for life.
Well, and I think especially in today's day and age, you just never know what opportunity is going to come your way. A single tweet can come through that Twitter stream, and it literally can.
Yes.
It really literally can. Now, having said that, it is important, I think, to have some plans, some goals.
Correct. Yeah.
But I think it's the steadfast adherence to those goals that might sometimes, ironically, hold you back.
This is true.
Yeah.
I think that specific goals can tend to be very hindersome.
Right.
But if you have sort of an abstract idea, okay, this is the kind of thing I want to do when I'm living my life.
Yeah.
I know that I actually don't feel that much success or personal gratification from being on television. So that's not. I know that that's not necessarily what I do with my whole life.
Sure.
I do know that I enjoy communicating internationally and cross-culturally, and I love helping people understand things.
Yeah.
So that happens to be what I'm doing on TV now.
Exactly.
But I don't know what that will be what form that will take
Sure.
in the future. And whatever form it takes, I'm happy to do that.
Yeah.
As long as I stay on that path, anything that comes my way, I'm happy to stumble upon.
Show host. Could I recommend show host?
Show host. Hey, sounds good to me. I mean,
Because it's a great way to meet all types of people, to communicate and get a message out. Yeah, certainly indeed. Well, it's been absolutely wonderful talking to you this morning. We do certainly appreciate your time. Really, the last question I have for you today is, would you like to hear a song? We usually wrap things up with a song, so today?
Yeah, I'd love to hear a song. Nowadays, I've been listening to a lot of music that just makes me feel good. You know, that feeling you get when it's sunny and you're walking down the street and you're just like,
Absolutely.
oh, yeah, I'm so excited, that kind of thing. So it's a song called Illuminate. It's by Afrojack and Matthew Coma. So,
and it's going to give us a lot of energy to go out on.
I feel that energy. I hope everybody else does. But
Well, I'm sure they're looking forward to it, as am I. Thanks again for joining us today,
Great.
Tyler.
Thank you so much for having me.
And that's been our conversation today with Tyler Rasch from the Abnormal Summit. Thanks for listening, and join us next Saturday at 9:05 for more of TBS eFM's Inside Out. Until then, I'm your host, Walter Foreman, leaving you today with Illuminate by Afrojack.